Get on your knees and empty your pockets, old man. Gary Hollis's shout tore through the silence of the Evertrust supermarket at 2 in the morning. The elderly man standing beside Register 3 looked at him without lowering his eyes. Why should I do that? If you don't have money, then don't pretend to be a customer, Gary snapped. People like you only come in here to steal. He looked the man over again, from the worn brown coat to the muddy work boots. Just look at you. You look like you crawled out from under a bridge. A homeless old man walks in here dressed like that and expects me to believe he came to shop. I didn't steal anything, the man said. His voice was rough, but his eyes held none of the panic. Gary, you heard me, Gary said, moving closer. Get on your knees and take everything out of your pockets, or I'll let the police do it for you. The man did not kneel. He stood with his shoulders straight and his hands visible. I brought those items to the register, he said. I haven't left the store. Then, what do you call this? Gary snatched the carton of milk from the counter and slammed it down beside a loaf of bread. He turned toward the cashier. Melissa, where did you see him hiding this stuff? Melissa Grant had been chewing gum to keep herself awake. The moment Gary looked at her, she straightened and gave him an eager smile. I saw him wandering around the fresh food section for almost an hour, Mr. Hollis. He was probably waiting for a chance to stuff something into his coat. I've seen his kind before. From the stockroom entrance, Kyle Benson leaned out and laughed. Good catch, boss. Nighttime always brings out the rats. Make him empty every pocket. He might have coins or something else hidden in there. A few late-night shoppers had gathered nearby. No one stepped forward. The customers could see his temper rising, and none of them wanted it turned on them. You hear that? Gary leaned close to the older man. Kneel down and dump everything onto the floor. Don't make me use force. I told you I brought money. The man started reaching inside his coat. Keep your hands where I can see them, Gary shouted. Kyle, Melissa, hold him. The two employees rushed forward. Take your hands off him. Annie Carter stepped between them and the older man. He didn't steal anything. Gary's face darkened. Carter, what the hell are you doing? Get back to your inventory. Stop, Mr. Hollis. Annie's voice shook, but she did not move. Behind her, the man in the old coat watched quietly, remembering every word. You're accusing an innocent person. Gary stared at her as though she had forgotten her place. Annie pointed toward the bread and milk. He didn't steal those. I checked the dairy and bakery sections earlier. Another customer carried that loaf and that carton over to the frozen food aisle, then left them there after changing her mind. I hadn't moved them back yet. He picked them up and brought them to the register. She took a breath. He hasn't even crossed the checkout or gone near the exit. How can you call that stealing? Gary laughed. You're defending this ragged old man now? His eyes moved over Annie's faded uniform and worn shoes. You should be grateful I hired you at all. Your abilities are limited, Carter. There was a reason I removed your name from the shift leader promotion list. Don't stand here pretending you're smarter than everyone else. I'm not pretending to be smart, Annie said, clenching her hands at her sides. I'm telling the truth. Shut your mouth, Carter. Melissa slapped the counter and pointed at her. There you go again, acting like you know everything. You're a night stalker. You barely know what's happening outside the warehouse. Maybe you and this old man are working together. Is that it? Are you helping him steal from the store? I only think you're blaming him for something he didn't do. Annie turned toward the computer behind the register. The inventory system shows that both products were moved from their original sections. The shortage matches the items left near the frozen aisle. If you don't believe me, check the security footage. Gary gave another mocking laugh. Inventory? You're proud of that little trick of yours, aren't you? Who are you to tell me to check the cameras? I'm not telling you how to do your job. I'm asking you to protect an innocent man. Annie's voice became steadier. You're the manager. You have the right to investigate. You do not have the right to force an elderly customer onto his knees and humiliate him because of his clothes. Kyle burst out laughing. Listen to the hero. He stepped closer, his expression hardening. Look at yourself, Carter. Your clothes are worn out, and you smell like the stockroom. You can barely take care of yourself. Aren't you working here to support that crippled father of yours after his stroke? Annie's face went still. You should be trying to keep Mr. Hollis happy. If he fires you, what are you and your father going to eat? Dirt. But here you are pretending to fight for justice. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry in front of them. Instead, Annie reached into her pocket. She took out several wrinkled bills and a few coins, then placed them on the counter. $4.20. she said. I'll pay for his bread and milk. That means the items have been purchased. Can you let him leave now? The store became silent. Melissa stopped chewing. Kyle stared at Annie as though she had lost her mind. Gary's face turned red. Annie had challenged him in front of customers, and worse, she had done it without shouting or backing down. Fine, he said. You want to be a hero? He tore Annie's employee badge from her uniform. Annie Carter, you are suspended without pay. Effective immediately. Get your things and get out of my store. The older man, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Young man. His voice was low, but it cut through Gary's anger. This store exists to serve people, not to humiliate them because of how they look. Are you certain this is how you want to handle this? Gary glared at him. Both of you get out before I call security and have you thrown out. Mr. Hollis, please, Annie began. Melissa cut her off. You should have known when to stay quiet. That's the lesson you get for making Mr. Hollis angry. Annie swallowed the ache in her throat. She bent down, gathered the coins that had rolled onto the floor, then turned to the older man. Are you all right? He nodded. Come with me. I'll walk you outside. It isn't safe for you here. They passed through the glass doors together. Cold wind moved across the parking lot, carrying the smell of rain and wet pavement. Under the yellow light near the entrance, the older man stopped and looked back through the glass. Gary was still standing beside the register, talking with Kyle and Melissa as though nothing had happened. Annie's employee badge lay on the counter where he had thrown it. I'm sorry, the man said. Because of these old clothes, you were dragged into this. If I had explained myself more clearly, perhaps you would not have lost a job you needed. I was suspended, Annie said, though the word still tightened her throat. I haven't been fired yet. She forced a small smile, even though her eyes burned. And even if I could go back to that moment, I would still step in. Why? My father taught me that money can be earned again. A person's dignity is harder to repair after somebody crushes it in public. If Annie's courage touched your heart, please like this video and comment where you are watching from. You may discover that someone near you is watching with you too. Subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and heartwarming stories. The man accepted the bag. Your father sounds like an honorable man. He sighed and adjusted the collar of his worn coat. But are you truly not sorry? That employee made it sound as though your family is already struggling. I'm worried, Annie admitted. My father had a mild stroke. The doctor called it mild, but the bills don't feel mild. His medicine costs more every month, and physical therapy isn't cheap. I'm also trying to save enough to start college. She closed her fingers around the coins. But if I had stayed quiet just to protect my job, I wouldn't have been able to look my father in the eye. Then she lifted the loaf of bread and carton of milk toward him. Please take these. The rain's getting heavier. Find somewhere dry and eat something before it gets too late. I need to reach the bus stop before the last bus leaves. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? She asked. For the first time that night, the man seemed unsure how to answer. Not because he lacked one, but because the question carried no suspicion. Annie had paid for his food, lost her badge, and was still worried he might have nowhere to sleep. Yes, he said. I have somewhere to go. Good. He reached into his coat, then stopped when Annie tensed. I was only going to give you back the money. No, keep it. I told you I could pay, and I believe you now. But if I take it back, Gary could say the sale wasn't real and use that against you. The man glanced at the receipt inside the bag. You think ahead. I work inventory. You learn to think about what people will blame on you later. There was no bitterness in her tone, only experience. That disturbed him more. What is your name? Annie. Annie Carter? Her eyes narrowed. I never told you my last name. The man looked toward the front windows. Her name had been printed on her badge before Gary tore it away, and he had shouted it several times during the confrontation. I heard your manager say it. Oh, she relaxed, though not completely. And you are? He hesitated for less than a second. Richard. No title, no last name. Take care of yourself, Richard. She started toward the sidewalk leading to the bus stop. Annie. She turned. Dignity and justice, he said quietly. Those are rare things in a world where people often care only about what they can gain. He paused. You have a courageous heart, Annie Carter. Believe me, the world will not remain unfair to you forever. One day, the people who look down on you tonight may have to raise their heads to see how far you have gone. Thank you, Annie was slightly surprised. She gave him a respectful nod, pulled her thin jacket tighter, and hurried into the rain toward the bus stop. Richard stood beneath the yellow light and watched her disappear into the darkness. The moment her small figure vanished beyond the far edge of the parking lot, his posture changed. He took out his phone and entered a secure number. The call was answered immediately. "Mr. Chairman," a middle-aged man said, "the legal and security teams are in position outside the branch. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, David." Richard Whitmore looked up at the glowing EverTrust sign. His voice had lost every trace of the tiredness Annie had heard inside the store. "Deactivate my anonymous inspection status. Connect me directly to the head of corporate human resources." "Yes, sir." "What happened inside?" The discrimination complaints sent to headquarters were true. Richard's gaze remained fixed on the store windows. "Worse than true. This branch has been allowed to rot from the inside." David's voice sharpened. "Do you want the security team to enter?" "Not yet. Preserve everything first. Camera feeds, backup footage, register records, employee schedules, internal complaints, promotion files, disciplinary reports, and every change made to the system tonight." "Understood." Gary Hollis attempted to humiliate a customer based on appearance. He refused to review the evidence, threatened physical force, and suspended an employee for telling the truth. Richard's hand tightened around the grocery bag. Melissa Grant and Kyle Benson supported the accusation. One lied about what she saw. The other mocked the employee's disabled father and encouraged the abuse. There was a short silence on the line. "Would you like all three placed on administrative leave pending investigation?" "No," Richard said. "The recordings are clear, and the live security feed confirms what happened. Terminate Gary Hollis, Melissa Grant, and Kyle Benson before the morning shift begins." "Yes, Mr. Whitmore," and flag their files. "They will not be rehired at any EverTrust location. I'll handle it personally. Gary may try to alter records before he leaves. Freeze his administrative access now." "Already in progress." Richard's expression hardened. "Pull every complaint connected to this branch for the last 5 years. I want to know who reviewed them, who dismissed them, and who benefited from keeping this place quiet." David hesitated. "There's something else, Reco. Several complaints were closed through the regional operations office." "Vanessa Reed?" "Yes." Richard was silent for a moment. "Open a confidential audit of her department. She is not to be warned." "Understood." "And pull Annie Carter's complete employment record." "For disciplinary review?" "No." Richard looked toward the road where Annie had disappeared into the rain. "Attendance, training scores, inventory corrections, promotion applications, performance reviews, every report submitted under her login, and every report Gary signed after she created it." David began entering the request. "May I ask why?" "Because a stock clerk understood this store better than its manager." Richard removed the small recording device from inside his coat. "And because she was willing to lose what little she had to protect someone she believed had nothing." He ended the call. By the time Annie reached the bus shelter, rain had soaked through her jacket. She sat beneath the cracked plastic roof, unaware that 3 employees were about to lose the positions they had used to torment her. She also had no idea that the old man she had defended was Richard Whitmore, the billionaire founder of EverTrust Markets. The last bus arrived 12 minutes late. Annie climbed aboard with rainwater dripping from the sleeves of her jacket. Only 4 passengers were inside. A hospital orderly asleep against the window, a woman holding 2 grocery bags between her shoes, a construction worker staring at his phone, and the driver, who gave Annie a tired nod as she tapped her transit card. She chose a seat near the back and pressed the wet grocery receipt from her pocket flat against her knee. $4.20 was not much to most people, but she had already divided that week's wages before earning them. Part would cover groceries. Part would go toward her father's medication. The rest was supposed to help pay for his physical therapy session on Friday. Now there might not be a paycheck at all. Annie opened her banking app. The balance made her chest tighten. She closed it before the number could become more frightening through repetition. When the bus reached her neighborhood, the rain had softened to a steady drizzle. She walked 3 blocks to the small brick house she shared with her father. The porch light was on. Through the living room window, she could see Thomas Carter asleep in his recliner with a blanket over his legs. His left hand rested against his chest, the fingers slightly curled from the stroke. A muted late-night game show flickered across the television. Annie stood beneath the porch awning and wiped her face with her sleeve. She did not want him to see that she had been crying. The lock clicked before she put in her key. Thomas opened the door with his right hand. "You missed the first bus again?" His voice was thick with sleep, but his eyes were alert. The weather slowed everything down. He looked past her toward the street. "Where's your car?" "Still at the repair shop. I thought they said it would be ready yesterday. They also said the transmission noise was nothing." Thomas stepped aside. "Come in before you catch pneumonia." Annie entered and removed her wet shoes near the door. She tried to pass him, but his gaze dropped to the empty clip on her uniform. "Where's your badge?" She paused. "Annie." "Dad, it's late." That didn't answer me. She placed her bag on the kitchen table. Something happened at work. Thomas moved carefully back toward his chair. Since the stroke, every quick motion had become a negotiation. Annie watched him lower himself and hated how much older he looked when he was tired. "Were you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Did somebody touch you?" "No." "Then sit down and tell me." Annie remained standing for a moment before taking the chair across from him. There was an older man in the store. Gary accused him of stealing bread and milk. "Did he?" "No." Another customer left the items near the frozen section. The man picked them up and took them to the register. "And Gary didn't check?" "He didn't want to check." Thomas's jaw tightened. "What did he do?" "He made the man stand in front of everybody. He told him to kneel and empty his pockets." Thomas stared at her. "He tried to make an old man kneel?" "Yes." "And you stepped in?" It was not a question. Annie looked down. "I knew where the items came from. I told Gary to check the camera." "What happened?" "He got angry. He's always angry when the truth isn't useful to him." Annie almost smiled, but it faded. "I paid for the bread and milk." "With what?" "The cash from tonight." Thomas looked toward the jar on the kitchen shelf marked Annie's tuition. "How much?" $4.20. "That's not what I meant." She understood. "He suspended me without pay." Thomas leaned back slowly. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was rain against the windows. "How long?" "He didn't say." "Did he give you anything in writing?" "No." "Did you sign anything?" "No." "Good." Annie looked at him. "You're not angry?" "I'm angry." "At me?" "At the man who put you in that position." Thomas lifted his weakened hand, tried to straighten two fingers, then stopped when they began to tremble. "But I'm also worried." "I know. Friday's therapy payment. We'll figure it out." "With what money?" "I can call the clinic. Maybe they'll let us delay it." Thomas shook his head. "You shouldn't have to bargain for my treatment. You shouldn't have to skip it. And you shouldn't have to lose your future because my body failed me." "Dad." "No. Let me finish." His voice remained calm, but Annie heard the shame beneath it. "You graduated with honors. You got into college. You should be worrying about classes and dorm rooms, not whether my hand can hold a coffee cup. You took care of me my whole life. That was my job. And helping you is mine." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. "Did you do the right thing tonight?" Annie blinked. "I think so. That wasn't what I asked." She drew a breath. "Yes." "Would you do it again?" "Yes." "Then don't apologize for it." Her eyes filled. "But we need the money." "We do." "What if Gary fires me? Then we face that when it comes." "You make it sound simple." "It isn't simple." Thomas leaned forward. "Doing right doesn't make the electric company patient. It doesn't lower the price of medicine. Justice doesn't always arrive before the bill is due." Annie wiped at one eye. "Then what am I supposed to do?" "Remember why you stood up, and be smarter tomorrow than you were tonight." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means write everything down. The time, the customers, what Gary said, what Melissa said, what Kyle said. Every detail you remember." "Why?" "Because people who lie first usually write the report first." Annie reached for the spiral notebook in her bag. Thomas nodded. "That's my girl." While she wrote, he went to the kitchen and heated canned tomato soup with one hand. Annie made grilled cheese sandwiches because neither of them had eaten. They sat at the small table as dawn began to lighten the windows. At 7:15, Gary Hollis entered Evertrust wearing a clean shirt and the confidence of a man expecting no consequences. Kyle arrived 10 minutes later, yawning. Melissa came in with fresh makeup and complained that Annie's unfinished inventory had left the store behind schedule. Gary had just unlocked his office when his computer screen went black. "What the hell?" His phone rang. "This is Hollis." "Mr. Hollis, this is Corporate Human Resources. Do not access any company systems." Remain in your office until security arrives. Gary stood. Security? What is this about? Your employment has been terminated effective immediately. His face drained. That's impossible. The line went silent for half a second. No, Mr. Hollis. It has already been authorized. By 8 o'clock, Gary, Kyle, and Melissa had been escorted from the building. None of them were told who had approved the decision. Across town, Annie had fallen asleep at the kitchen table with her notebook open beneath her arm. A black sedan stopped in front of the Carter house. Margaret Cole stepped out carrying a leather folder and walked toward the porch. Margaret Cole climbed the porch steps and knocked twice. Thomas opened the door before Annie woke. He studied the woman standing outside in a charcoal suit, holding a leather folder beneath one arm. Can I help you? Mr. Carter? Yes. My name is Margaret Cole. I'm with EverTrust Markets. Thomas's expression hardened. If you came to fire my daughter, you can do it without waking her. Margaret glanced past him. Annie was asleep at the kitchen table, her cheek resting near the open spiral notebook. I didn't come to fire her. Then why are you here? To correct something the company should have noticed a long time ago. Thomas remained in the doorway. Margaret did not try to step inside. I understand your caution, she said. May I speak with both of you? Thomas looked back at Annie. She worked all night. I can return later. The sound of their voices woke her. Annie lifted her head, confused, then saw Margaret outside. She stood too quickly and nearly knocked over the empty soup bowl beside her. Is this about my suspension? Margaret looked at her uniform, the damp fabric now wrinkled from sleep. Yes, but not in the way you think. Thomas opened the door wider. Come in. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Margaret wiped her shoes on the mat before entering. Thomas offered her the chair across from Annie. Would you like coffee? He asked. If you're having some. Thomas moved toward the kitchen. Annie started to help, but he raised a hand. I can pour coffee. His left hand remained close to his body while he used the right. Margaret noticed but said nothing. Annie sat down. Who are you exactly? Executive Administration. That doesn't tell me much. No, it doesn't. Margaret placed the leather folder on the table. What happened at the store last night triggered an immediate review. Annie's stomach tightened. Gary said I interfered with a theft investigation. The footage shows there was no theft. Thomas set 3 mugs on the table. So she was right, he said. Yes. Annie stared at Margaret. You checked the cameras? Corporate security preserved the video before anyone at the branch could alter it. Why would anyone at corporate care that quickly? Margaret paused. Because the incident was more serious than Mr. Hollis understood. Is the old man all right? He is. Did the police bother him? No police report was filed. Annie released a breath she had been holding. Margaret continued. Gary Hollis, Kyle Benson, and Melissa Grant were terminated this morning. Annie looked at her father, then back at Margaret. All 3? Yes. For what they did to him. For what they did last night and for what the review uncovered afterward. Thomas sat beside Annie. What else did you find? Margaret opened the folder. Mr. Hollis had 5 prior complaints involving discrimination, intimidation, and improper loss prevention procedures. Several were closed without a full investigation. We also found altered schedules, inconsistent disciplinary records, and employee work submitted under his name. Annie's eyes moved toward her notebook. My reports. Some of them. How many? We are still reviewing the files. Annie gave a quiet, humorless laugh. I knew he was taking credit. I didn't know anybody would ever care. Margaret met her eyes. They should have cared before last night. Thomas folded his arms. What happens to my daughter? Her suspension has been canceled. She will receive back pay for the full shift and any hours lost because of Mr. Hollis's action. Annie looked down at her hands. So I can go back? You can. Relief came first, followed by something she had not expected. Disappointment. Going back meant returning to the same aisles, the same stockroom, and the same job she had already outgrown. Margaret noticed the change in her face. But that isn't the only reason I came. She removed several pages from the folder. Your attendance record is excellent. You have no valid disciplinary actions. Your inventory corrections reduced spoilage and pricing errors. You also trained 3 employees despite never being given a training title. Kyle was one of them, Annie said. I saw that. He still made me do his work. Margaret's mouth tightened. That was also documented. Thomas leaned closer. What are you offering? Margaret turned the first page toward Annie. At the top was the EverTrust logo. followed by words Annie read twice before they made sense. EverTrust Scholarship and Management Internship. This is a paid early career program at corporate headquarters, Margaret said. It includes management training, transportation assistance, academic advising, and eligibility for a full college scholarship. Annie did not touch the paper. I didn't apply for this. No. Then why am I being offered it? Because your record was reviewed. After I defended that man, that caused someone to open the file. It did not create what was inside it. Annie looked at the list of qualifications. Most applicants were college students or recent graduates. She had finished high school 3 months ago. I'm not qualified. Margaret slid another document across the table. This is the anonymous evaluation of your inventory work. Your recommendations scored higher than several submissions from assistant managers. That can't be right. It is. Thomas picked up the page and read it slowly. Annie looked at Margaret. Is this charity? No. Public relations? No cameras, no press release, no requirement to tell your story. Then why now? Margaret answered without hesitation. Because people failed to see your work until a crisis forced them to look. Annie sat back. Outside, rainwater continued dripping from the edge of the roof. A school bus passed at the end of the street, carrying students only a few months younger than she was. Thomas tapped the scholarship page with one finger. What happens if she says no? She may return to her former position with back pay and a corrected personnel file. And if she says yes? She reports to headquarters Monday morning. Annie looked at him. Dad, Monday is your therapy appointment. I can reschedule. You shouldn't have to. I'm not letting you turn down college money because I need help getting into a car. We don't even have a working car. The program provides transportation assistance, Margaret said. A prepaid transit pass begins immediately. If the internship requires branch travel, the company arranges it. Annie's suspicion returned. This sounds too convenient. It is organized, Margaret corrected. That may feel unusual after working for Mr. Hollis. Thomas gave a small laugh. Margaret closed the folder, leaving the offer in front of Annie. You do not have to decide this morning. Take 24 hours. Annie looked at the pages but did not pick them up. There are people with degrees who would want this. There are. And you're giving it to an 18-year-old Night Stalker? We are asking her to compete for it. That's different. Yes, Margaret said. It is. She stood and handed Thomas a business card. Call me with any questions. Not the store. Not regional operations. Me. Thomas studied the card. Who asked you to come here? Margaret reached for the door. Someone who believes Annie's work deserves a fair review. Does that person have a name? A slight smile appeared on Margaret's face. Everyone does, Mr. Carter. Some names simply carry more weight than others. After she left, Annie remained at the table, staring at the offer. Thomas lifted the first page. You're thinking about saying no. I don't want to owe anyone. A fair opportunity is not a debt. What if I get there and everyone knows I don't belong? Thomas pushed the page back toward her. Then let them learn differently. Annie touched the edge of the paper. Across Atlanta, Richard Whitmore sat in a private office reviewing her employment file. Beside it lay the receipt for bread and milk. Margaret called him from the sedan. She has the offer. Did she accept? Not yet. Richard looked out over the city. Good. Margaret was silent. He understood the question. If she accepts too quickly because she feels grateful, then we have learned nothing. And if she refuses, then we respect it. Richard closed the file. But I don't think she will. Back in the Carter kitchen, Annie turned to the second page. Beneath the program description was a blank line waiting for her signature. For years, other people had decided what she was capable of before allowing her to speak. This time, the decision belonged to her. Annie read the offer 3 times after Margaret left, but the words did not become easier to trust. Paid internship, transportation assistance, academic advising, full scholarship eligibility. Thomas watched her from the kitchen counter while spreading butter across 2 slices of bread with his right hand. His left hand remained curled near his waist. You've been staring at that page for 20 minutes, he said. Has it changed? No. Then maybe you're waiting for it to disappear. Annie closed the folder. Things like this don't happen to people like us. Thomas placed the bread into a skillet. What kind of people are we? You know what I mean. I know what you're afraid to say. She looked at him. Thomas lowered the heat beneath the pan. Poor people, black people, people from this neighborhood, people who don't have friends in high offices, all of it. That doesn't answer whether you can do the work. It matters whether they think I can. They already asked you. They asked because of what happened at the store. They looked because of what happened. They stayed because of what they found. Annie opened the folder again. What if someone made a mistake? Then it's a well-organized mistake with transportation assistance. She tried not to laugh. Thomas smiled. There she is. The tomato soup warmed in a small pot beside the skillet. It was the same meal they made whenever money was tight or one of them had been sick. Thomas had served it after Annie's mother died, when Annie was 9 and neither of them knew how to fill the silence at the table. Years later, it still tasted like grief made manageable. Annie helped carry the bowls to the table. Thomas tore his grilled cheese in half. When I started working at Northside Elementary, I was a substitute custodian, he said. No benefits. No guarantee I'd be there the next week. You've told me. Not this part. She waited. The head custodian got sick during winter break. A pipe burst on the second floor, and nobody could find the shutoff valve. The principal was calling plumbers, the district office, anybody with a title. Thomas dipped his sandwich into the soup. I knew where the valve was because I'd been cleaning around it every night for 6 months. I shut the water off before it ruined the classrooms downstairs. What happened? The principal gave me a permanent job. Annie smiled. Because you saved the school. No, because he finally noticed I knew the building better than the people making decisions about it. His gaze moved toward the EverTrust folder. People who work at night see things daylight management misses. Annie turned the spoon between her fingers. What if I go there and embarrass myself? You probably will. She stared at him. Everybody embarrasses themselves somewhere new, he said. That isn't failure. What if they look at me and only see a girl who stacks boxes? Then show them what the girl stacking boxes learned while they weren't looking. Annie lowered her voice. I don't want to leave you alone. I'm not helpless. You almost fell this morning. I stood up too fast. You can't drive yet. Mrs. Bennett already takes me to church. She can take me to therapy. You hate asking her. I also hate canned green beans. Life continues. Annie laughed despite herself, then grew serious again. If I accept, I'll have to report Monday. Then you should find something to wear. I own one decent dress. You're going to a corporate office, not a funeral. I don't own a suit. Mrs. Bennett's granddaughter works at a bank. She might have something. I'm not borrowing clothes from half the neighborhood. Thomas lifted one eyebrow. You're willing to risk your job for a stranger, but borrowing a jacket is where pride draws the line. That's different. Pride always says that. After dinner, Annie called Margaret. The woman answered on the second ring. This is Margaret Cole. Miss Cole, this is Annie Carter. Hello, Annie. I've decided. Margaret waited without pushing her. I'll accept the internship. Good. But I have conditions. A brief silence followed. I'm listening. I want the same evaluations as everyone else. I don't want easier assignments because I'm younger, and I don't want anyone using what happened at the store in advertising. That has already been placed in writing, and if I don't qualify for the scholarship, I want someone to tell me honestly. You will be evaluated honestly. Annie took a breath. Then I'll be there Monday. I'll send the schedule tonight. Your transit card will arrive tomorrow morning. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The program will be difficult. That's actually the first thing anybody has said about it that makes me trust it. Margaret laughed softly. Monday at 8. Arrive 15 minutes early. I will. When the call ended, Thomas extended his right hand across the table. Congratulations. Annie shook it. I haven't won anything. No, you chose something. The next 2 days passed quickly. Mrs. Bennett arrived with 3 garment bags and refused to leave until Annie tried everything on. The best option was a navy suit belonging to her granddaughter. The sleeves were slightly long, but the jacket fit well enough after Thomas folded the cuffs inward and pressed them with an old iron. On Monday morning, Annie woke before sunrise. She braided her hair, packed a turkey sandwich and an apple, then checked the folder twice. Thomas stood in the hallway wearing his robe. You have your notebook? She held up the worn spiral pad. Transit card? In my pocket. Phone charged? Yes. Lunch? Yes, Dad. He nodded toward her shoes. Those comfortable? No. Then you look professional. Annie hugged him carefully. At the bus stop, she watched workers in hospital scrubs, construction vests, and restaurant uniforms begin their morning. For the first time in months, she was not traveling home from a night shift. She was moving towards something she could not yet name, EverTrust headquarters rose above downtown Atlanta in glass and steel. Annie stopped across the street and looked up at the company name near the top of the building. At the supermarket, she had known every aisle, every code, and every person who could make her life harder. Here, she knew nothing. She crossed the street anyway. Inside the lobby, a security officer looked at her borrowed suit, her old shoes, and the spiral notebook held against her chest. "Deliveries use the entrance around back," he said. Annie tightened her grip on the folder. "I'm not making a delivery. I'm here for the management internship." The officer looked at her again, then checked the screen in front of him twice. For years, Annie had wondered what it would feel like to walk through a door meant for people with a future. She had not expected someone to question whether she belonged before she reached the elevator. The security officer looked at Annie for a third time, then lowered his eyes to the screen. "Spell your last name." "Carter, C-A-R-T-E-R. He typed slowly. "First name?" "Annie." "I heard you." Annie kept her face still. Behind her, two men in tailored suits passed through the turnstiles without being stopped. One of them nodded at the officer, who returned the greeting immediately. The officer frowned at his monitor. "You're 18? "Yes. This says management internship. That's why I'm here." He looked at the borrowed navy suit, the worn shoes, and the spiral notebook again. "Do you have identification?" Annie handed him her driver's license. He studied it longer than necessary. A woman's voice came from behind the desk. "She's on the list, Mr. Lewis." Margaret Cole crossed the lobby with a tablet in one hand. She wore a dark green jacket and low heels that made almost no sound against the marble floor. The officer straightened. "Miss Cole, I was just verifying her information." "I can see that." Margaret handed Annie's license back to her. "Good morning, Annie." "Good morning. You're early." "My father said 15 minutes early means on time." "Your father is correct." Margaret turned to the officer. "Please issue Miss Carter her access badge." He printed a temporary card without another question. As they walked toward the elevators, Annie glanced back. "You didn't have to come down." "Yes, I did. I could have handled it." "I know. Then why did you step in?" Margaret pressed the elevator button. "Because there is a difference between allowing someone to handle a problem and allowing a problem to become their first lesson about a company." The doors opened. Inside, Annie saw her reflection in the mirrored wall. The borrowed sleeves were a little too long, just as she had feared. Margaret noticed her adjusting one cuff. "It fits well enough." "It isn't mine. Most people wear borrowed confidence their first week." Annie looked at her. Margaret smiled. "Some simply have more expensive jackets." The elevator rose past floors marked finance, legal affairs, distribution strategy, and executive operations. Annie read each name as if there might be a test later. "What floor are we going to?" 22. "Training and leadership development." "That sounds high." "It is only a floor. That's easy to say when you work here." Margaret considered that. "Fair." The doors opened onto a bright reception area with glass walls and a view of downtown Atlanta. Employees moved past carrying coffee, phones, and laptops. Nobody smelled like cardboard, freezer, air, or cleaning solution. Annie suddenly became aware that her shoes made a faint squeak. Margaret led her into a conference room where 11 other interns were already seated. A young man in a gray suit was describing a summer in London. A blonde woman beside him laughed as if she had heard the story before. Another man with a leather portfolio was talking about his MBA program. The room quieted briefly when Annie entered. Margaret introduced her to the program director, Harold Lane, a thin man in his early 60s with reading glasses resting low on his nose. "Mr. Lane, this is Annie Carter." Harold shook her hand. "Welcome to EverTrust headquarters." "Thank you, sir." "You can call me Harold." Annie nodded. "Yes, sir." He smiled. "We'll work on that." Margaret left after telling Annie where to find her office. Annie chose an empty seat near the end of the table. The young man in the gray suit leaned over. "Blake Harrison." "Annie Carter." "What school?" "I graduated from Carver High in June." He waited as though she had not finished. "And college?" "I'm starting next year." Blake's eyebrows rose. "You're not in college yet?" "No." Across the table, the blonde woman looked up from her phone. "I thought this was a graduate track internship." Harold heard her. "It includes several tracks, Sophie." "I was only asking." A man seated beside her closed his leather portfolio. "Nathan Pierce," he said to Annie. "Georgia Tech MBA. Nice to meet you. What department were you in before this?" Store operations. Assistant management. Overnight stock and inventory. The silence that followed was short, but Annie felt it. Blake leaned back. That's a big jump. It is. Good for you. The words sounded supportive, but his tone made them feel like a question. Harold began orientation. Each intern received a tablet, a project binder, and a schedule. Annie kept her spiral notebook beside the tablet. Sophie glanced at it. You know everything's digital, right? Yes. Then why carry that? I remember better when I write things down. Nathan smiled. Old school. My father would like that. The morning session covered corporate structure, market regions, labor costs, and distribution networks. Annie listened without speaking until Harold displayed a sample inventory problem. A branch sells 1,200 units of a refrigerated product each week, he said. Sales are expected to increase by 15%. How many units should the branch order? Several hands went up. 1,380, Blake said. Correct, Harold replied. Annie raised her hand. Harold nodded. Yes? That's only correct if spoilage, lead time, and shelf capacity stay the same. The room turned toward her. Harold looked at the slide. Go on. If the product is refrigerated, the branch can't order based only on demand. You'd need the expiration window, delivery frequency, and current waste rate. Otherwise, the store could increase sales and still lose money. Nathan crossed his arms. The question was basic forecasting. I know. So you complicated it. I made it closer to what happens in a store. Harold removed his glasses. What would you check first? Weekly spoilage by delivery day. If waste rises before the next shipment, the order schedule may be wrong. Not the quantity. Harold nodded once. That is the answer I wanted but did not expect. Blake looked at Annie's notebook. You learned that stocking shelves? I learned it watching managers order too much, then blame the night crew when food expired. A few people laughed. Annie did not. At lunch, the group headed to the corporate cafeteria. Annie studied the menu board and quietly stepped aside. The least expensive hot meal cost more than she usually spent on dinner for herself and Thomas. She took her paper bag to a small table near the windows and unwrapped a turkey sandwich. Sophie passed with a salad and sparkling water. You're not eating with us? I am eating. You know what I mean. I brought lunch. Sophie hesitated, then walked away. A few minutes later, an older black woman with silver hair approached carrying tomato soup and half a grilled cheese sandwich. Is this seat taken? No, ma'am. The woman sat across from her. You can call me Evelyn. I'm Annie. I know. Annie paused. Have we met? No. But people are already talking about the 18-year-old who corrected Harold Lane before lunch. I wasn't correcting him. What were you doing? Adding information. Evelyn smiled. That is the polite version of correcting someone. Annie lowered her sandwich. Do you work here? Sometimes. What department? The one that asks questions nobody enjoys answering. Annie decided the woman was joking, though her face suggested she rarely joked without a reason. Evelyn nodded toward the notebook. What do you write in there? Things I don't want people to change later. That is a useful habit. For a moment, they ate in silence. Then Evelyn asked, Do you believe you belong in this building? Annie looked through the glass at the city below. I know I can do the work. That was not my question. Annie thought about the security desk, Blake's raised eyebrows, Sophie's smile, and Nathan calling her experience basic. I'm still deciding whether the building knows I belong. Evelyn took another spoonful of soup. Buildings do not decide anything. People do, and people can be taught. After lunch, Harold gathered the interns and announced their first major assignment. Each of them would choose one operational problem affecting EverTrust and develop a solution for the board. Ideas appeared on the screen: customer loyalty, delivery technology, premium store expansion, automated checkout, and online marketing. Annie barely looked at them. At the bottom of a labor report, she saw one line printed in small type. Overnight employee turnover, 41%, nearly double the company average. She circled the number in her notebook. The supermarket had taught Annie how invisible a worker could become. Headquarters was about to teach her what happened when an invisible worker began asking visible questions. Annie stared at the figure until Harold called the room back to order. Choose carefully, he said. Your project should solve a problem the company can measure. We are not looking for speeches. We are looking for results. Blake raised his hand. Can we work with projected markets? Yes, if the data is available. I'm thinking about premium store expansion in North Georgia. Sophie chose customer loyalty among high-income families. Nathan announced that he would study automated checkout and labor reduction. Harold looked toward Annie. What about you? She turned her notebook so he could see the number she had circled. Overnight employee turnover. Nathan glanced at the report. That's a human resources issue. It's an operations issue too. How? When experienced workers leave, stores make more mistakes. New people have to be trained. Deliveries are delayed. Inventory gets counted wrong. Nathan shrugged. Hourly workers leave. That's what hourly workers do. Annie met his eyes. Sometimes they leave because the company makes staying impossible. The room went quiet. Harold studied her for a moment. Prepare a one-page proposal. If the data supports it, you may continue. Annie spent the afternoon in the corporate research library. The company had years of reports, but most were organized by region, department, and profit level rather than by shift. She had to compare separate files to understand what happened after midnight. At 5:30, Margaret found her surrounded by printed charts. You know the building does not close when you leave. I'm almost done. You said that 40 minutes ago. Annie pointed at the screen. The turnover rate isn't the same everywhere. It's highest in stores where the overnight pay difference is less than $1. That sounds reasonable. There's more. Those stores also change schedules more often. Margaret pulled out the chair beside her. How often? Some employees get less than 2 days' notice. One store changed the same worker's schedule 6 times in 1 month. Can you prove that caused the resignations? Not yet. Then do not write that it did. Annie frowned. But it probably did. Probably is where people with power will attack you. Margaret pointed toward the charts. Write what the records prove, then ask the workers what the records cannot tell you. Annie nodded and crossed out a sentence. Margaret watched her make the correction. You do not have to finish the entire project tonight. I know. Do you? Annie glanced at the clock. My bus leaves in 20 minutes. That is not what I asked. Annie closed the laptop. Margaret walked with her toward the elevator. Has anyone explained how to request employee interviews? No. Ask Harold for formal access. Do not contact workers through private numbers. Why? Because someone may accuse you of pressuring them. I'm only trying to hear what happened. Intent will not protect you if the process is unclear. Annie thought of Gary changing reports and claiming credit. So I document everything. Everything important. The next morning, Harold approved interviews at 3 Atlanta area branches. Vanessa Reed's office had to authorize access because the stores fell under her region. 2 days passed without a response. Annie sent a polite follow-up. Another day passed. On Friday afternoon, an email arrived from Vanessa's assistant. Your request is under review. Regional operations recommends selecting a project with more reliable data. Annie read the sentence twice. Blake passed behind her desk. Problem? They don't want me interviewing night workers. Maybe they're busy. All 3 stores? He glanced at the email. Regional leadership doesn't stop a good project for no reason. Sometimes the reason is that they don't want the question asked. Blake gave her a careful look. You should be careful saying things like that. Why? Because you've been here 1 week. Annie closed the message. That doesn't make the number smaller. Without interview approval, she worked with information already available. She compared payroll, injury reports, promotion applications, and training attendance. The pattern became clearer. Night workers had fewer opportunities to attend management courses because classes were held during the day. Many left work at 7 in the morning, rode buses home, cared for children or aging parents, then returned the same evening. At one branch, 10 overnight employees had applied for promotion in 2 years. None had been selected. At another, 3 black workers were listed as having withdrawn their applications. Annie found no explanation. She brought the figures to Harold. He leaned back in his chair. This is stronger than I expected, but not strong enough. Why do you say that? Because it tells me what happened, not why. Harold tapped one of the pages. You still need interviews. Regional operations won't approve them. He read Vanessa's email. Leave this with me. The approval came the following morning. Annie's first visit was to an EverTrust branch near the airport. Margaret arranged transportation with a company driver, though Annie insisted on meeting the night staff during their regular shift. At 1:30 in the morning, She sat in a break room with cracked vinyl chairs and a vending machine that hummed louder than the refrigerator. A woman named Denise Walker poured powdered creamer into her coffee. She was 58 and had worked nights for 11 years. "Why nights?" Annie asked. "I raised my grandson during the day." "Is he still living with you?" "He's in community college now." "Then why stay on nights?" Denise gave a tired laugh. "Because every time I apply for day supervisor, they tell me I don't have leadership experience." "You've trained new employees." 23 of them. Annie wrote the number down. "Have you ever taken the company management course? It starts at 9 in the morning. Your shift ends at 7, and I live an hour away by bus, so you'd have to stay awake all day." "Did it twice." Denise stirred her coffee. "Fell asleep on the bus and missed my stop both times." A younger employee named Marcus Lee joined them. He worked 2 jobs and sometimes slept in his car between shifts. Another worker said her schedule had changed so often that she lost her childcare arrangement. Annie listened without interrupting. Before leaving, she asked Denise one final question. "What would make people stay?" Denise looked toward the break room door. "A schedule we can plan around, a safe way home, a chance to move up that doesn't require pretending we don't have families." She picked up her coffee. "People in headquarters talk about treating everyone the same, but we don't all carry the same load." Annie stopped writing. Denise continued. "Justice isn't always giving everybody the same thing. Sometimes it's finally noticing who has been carrying more." On the ride back to headquarters, Annie wrote the sentence at the top of a new page. Below it, she added a title, "The Night Shift Promise." By Monday morning, she had the beginning of a real proposal. Stable schedules, fair overnight pay, transportation support, emergency medical assistance, anonymous complaints, and management training workers could complete from home. She submitted the outline before lunch. On the 29th floor, Vanessa Reed opened the document in her office. Her public smile disappeared as she read the section about promotion audits and missing complaints. She circled 3 words in red. Independent Regional Review. Then she picked up the phone. "Schedule Annie Carter for a meeting," she told her assistant. "When?" Vanessa looked down at Annie's proposal. "Tomorrow morning. Before that girl starts believing she belongs here." Vanessa Reed's assistant called Annie at 8:15 the next morning. "Miss Reed would like to see you at 9. Annie looked at the clock on her computer. "Did she say what the meeting is about?" "Your project. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself." The call ended before Annie could ask another question. Margaret was reviewing a budget report at the next desk. Annie turned toward her. "Vanessa Reed wants to see me." Margaret kept her eyes on the screen. "When?" 9. "Did you request the meeting?" "No." "Then bring your notebook and a copy of your proposal." Her assistant said to bring only myself. Margaret looked up. "Your work is part of yourself while you are in this building." At 5 minutes before 9, Annie stood outside Vanessa's office on the 29th floor. The reception area was quiet, with white walls, expensive furniture, and framed photographs of Vanessa shaking hands with city officials and nonprofit leaders. In one picture, she stood behind a group of black high school students beneath a banner that read, "Building Tomorrow's Leaders." The assistant opened the door. "She'll see you now." Vanessa rose from behind a wide glass desk. Her dark blue suit fit perfectly, and her smile looked practiced without appearing false. "Annie Carter, come in." "Good morning, Miss Reed." "Please, sit." Annie sat in the chair across from her and placed her notebook on her lap. Vanessa noticed it. "I hear you carry that everywhere." "It helps me keep track of things." "That can be useful." Vanessa folded her hands. "I read your night shift promise proposal." "Thank you. It is ambitious." Annie waited. "You interviewed employees at the airport branch?" "Yes, ma'am. The visit was approved." "I know. I approved it." Annie remembered that the authorization had only arrived after Harold intervened. Vanessa continued. "Some of those workers have strong opinions. Strong opinions are not always reliable evidence. I used the interviews to understand the data. I didn't replace the numbers with personal stories." "That is good to hear." Vanessa's smile remained, but her voice cooled. "Tell me, Annie, what do you believe this company owes its employees? Fair pay for the work they do, safe conditions, a chance to advance if they qualify. And you believe EverTrust does not provide those things?" "I believe some workers have less access to them." "That is a serious claim." "It's what the records show." Vanessa leaned back. "You have been at headquarters for less than 2 weeks." "Yes, ma'am." "You are 18 years old." "Yes." "You have no college degree, no formal management experience, and limited knowledge of regional operations. That's true. Yet you are proposing that this company audit managers who have spent 20 or 30 years building their careers. I'm proposing that promotion records be reviewed. By people who understand them, by people who aren't responsible for the decisions being reviewed. For the first time, Vanessa's smile faded. Do you think I'm hiding something? Annie felt her pulse quicken. I didn't say that. You implied it. I said an independent review would be more credible. Vanessa stood and walked toward the windows. Do you know how difficult it is to manage more than 200 stores? No. Thousands of employees. Supply disruptions. Theft. Labor shortages. Medical claims. Customer complaints. Every decision creates 10 new problems. I understand it's complicated. Do you? Vanessa turned. Because your proposal reads as though every tired employee is a victim and every manager is waiting to exploit them. That isn't what I wrote. It is how the board may hear it. Annie opened her notebook. Vanessa's eyes dropped to it. You don't need to take notes. I remember better when I write. This is a conversation, not an investigation. Annie closed the notebook but kept the pen in her hand. Vanessa returned to her chair. I want to help you. Annie said nothing. You have a compelling story. A young black woman from a difficult background, working nights while caring for an ill father. You were overlooked, then given a chance. People will respond to that. My project isn't about my story. Everything is about a story at this level. Vanessa slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a different project outline titled Improving Customer Loyalty Through Community Engagement. This would suit you better, Vanessa said. You could interview families, work with local churches, and help EverTrust strengthen its image in underserved neighborhoods. Why would that suit me better? You understand those communities. I also understand night operations. Vanessa's expression hardened for half a second. The customer project is visible, positive, and practical. Your current proposal may create conflict the company does not need. If the problem is real, the conflict already exists. Vanessa tapped one finger against the desk. You are intelligent, Annie. That is obvious. But intelligence without judgment can become arrogance. Annie looked at the replacement proposal. Am I being ordered to change topics? No. Then I'd like to continue with the night shift promise. Vanessa smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. You should think carefully before deciding. I have. You were given an unusual opportunity. Many people would be grateful simply to sit where you are sitting. I am grateful. Gratitude is often more valuable than ambition. Annie tightened her grip on the pen. I'm grateful for the opportunity, Miss Reed. I also think the opportunity requires honest work. Silence settled between them. Vanessa closed the folder. You may continue your project. Thank you, but regional data is confidential. Any request must come through my office. I understand. And if your work creates unnecessary disruption, the scholarship committee will consider whether you are suited for the program. Annie heard the threat, even though Vanessa never raised her voice. I understand that too. When Annie returned to the 22nd floor, Nathan looked up from his computer. How did the royal audience go? She wants me to change projects. To what? Community engagement. That's probably smarter. For who? For you. Vanessa Reed could end this internship with one email. Sophie lowered her voice. You don't have to fight every battle, Annie. I'm not fighting every battle. It looks that way. Annie sat down and opened her data file. The words on the screen blurred for a moment. That evening, she found Thomas in the kitchen struggling with the rubber therapy band. His left hand slipped, and the band snapped against the table. Leave it, he muttered. Annie picked it up. You're tired. I'm tired of needing practice to open a jar. She sat across from him. Vanessa Reed wants me to change my project. Why? She says I don't understand the company. Do you? Not all of it. Does she understand the night shift? Annie thought about the polished office and the photographs on the wall. I don't know. Thomas held out his hand for the band. When I was young, older men told me age made them right. Sometimes it only meant they had protected the same mistake longer. So I should ignore experience? No. Respect experience. Question excuses. The next morning, Annie revised the night shift promise. She added projected costs, turnover savings, accident reduction, and training returns. By noon, the proposal was stronger than before Vanessa called her upstairs. At the same time, Vanessa sent a private message to Regional Human Resources. Review Annie Carter's access. Limit all employee-level data until further notice. Gary had tried to control Annie with anger. Vanessa intended to do it with locked doors, polished language, and rules that appeared fair until they were used against the wrong person. The restrictions appeared the next morning. Annie logged into the research portal and found 3 folders grayed out. Payroll history, promotion records, and employee complaints were no longer available. She refreshed the page. Nothing changed. Nathan glanced over from the next desk. Computer trouble? My access changed. Maybe you clicked the wrong folder. I used these files yesterday. Sophie leaned back in her chair. Did Vanessa say she was limiting your access? No. Then ask her office. Annie opened her email and found a message sent at 6:12 a.m. Due to confidentiality requirements, intern access to employee-level data has been revised. All future requests must receive regional authorization. There was no signature beyond regional operations. Blake read the message over her shoulder. That seems normal. It only applies to me. You don't know that. Annie turned her screen toward him. Can you open the promotion file? Blake returned to his desk and clicked through the system. Yes. Nathan? He tried. Mine works. Sophie checked hers and said nothing. Blake shifted his weight. Maybe your project includes sensitive information. All our projects use company data. Yours is about employees accusing managers. My project is about turnover. That isn't how Vanessa sees it. Annie closed the portal. At 10, she took printed copies of her prior requests to Margaret's office. Margaret read the message, then checked the access log on her tablet. This was authorized through regional operations, she said. Vanessa, her department. Can she do that? She can request restrictions. Whether they remain is another question. Annie sat across from her. If I complain, she'll say I'm proving her point. Which point? That I'm immature and difficult. Margaret placed the tablet on the desk. People sometimes call a woman difficult when she notices what they hope she would ignore. What should I do? Document what changed. Request the information through the proper channel. Do not accuse anyone yet. That could take weeks. Yes. My presentation is in 6. Then find records her office does not control. Annie frowned. Like what? You understand inventory. When one number is wrong, what do you compare it with? Delivery logs, register sales, damage reports. Margaret nodded. Human systems leave more than one record, too. Annie returned to her desk and began listing possible sources. Training attendance, access, card activity, scheduling software, uniform orders, workers' compensation claims, and recruitment costs. None provided a full picture, but together they could reveal whether the official figures made sense. By late afternoon, she found her first contradiction. A branch in Decatur reported only 3 overnight resignations during the previous year. Yet the same branch had ordered 31 new overnight uniforms and processed 24 new employee badges. Annie checked another location. Low turnover on the regional report. High recruitment spending in finance. She opened a third. No overnight injuries listed, but 2 employees had medical leave coded through payroll. Someone had cleaned the summary without cleaning the systems beneath it. Still working? Harold stood beside her desk with his coat over one arm. I found something. She showed him the comparisons. He read without speaking. These numbers don't match, he said. I know. Could there be an administrative explanation? Maybe. But it's happening across several stores. Harold set his coat down. Send this to the independent review team. I thought that team only handled final projects. It can handle evidence involving possible record manipulation. Should I copy Vanessa? No. Not until the documents are preserved. That answer told Annie more than he intended. She sent the files before leaving. Then, because the last bus had already passed, she stayed to wait for the next one. Most of the floor emptied. Cleaning crews moved through the halls, and the city lights reflected against the glass walls. Annie went to the employee history room to find older public reports. A framed photograph near the entrance caught her attention. A younger Evelyn Whitmore stood beside a man in his 30s at the opening of EverTrust's first distribution center. He wore a hard hat and work shirt, not a suit. The plaque beneath the image read, Richard Whitmore, founder and chief executive officer. Annie moved closer. The face was younger and clean-shaven. The hair was darker, but the eyes were the same, calm, watchful. Impossible to forget. She took out her phone and searched the company website. The official photograph was nearly 12 years old, but the jawline, the slight bend in the nose, and the expression matched the man from the supermarket. Her stomach tightened. "Annie?" She turned so quickly that her notebook slipped from her hand. Margaret stood at the end of the hallway. "You're still here." Annie picked up the notebook. "Who was he?" Margaret looked toward the photograph. "You know who." "The man at the store." Margaret did not answer. "Was that Richard Whitmore?" "You should speak with him directly." Annie's face grew hot. "You knew?" "Yes." "The whole time?" "Yes." "And nobody thought I deserved to know?" "It was not my decision to tell you, but it was your decision to come to my house. That was my responsibility." Annie held the notebook against her chest. "Was the internship part of some experiment?" "No." "How am I supposed to believe that?" Margaret's voice softened. "Because your work was evaluated without your name attached. That doesn't explain why he pretended to be poor." "No, it does not." "Did he arrange for Gary to accuse him?" "No." "Did he know Gary would treat him that way?" "He suspected the branch had serious problems." "And he let it happen?" Margaret held Annie's chaza. "Yes." A conference room door opened behind them. Richard stepped into the hallway wearing a dark suit. He looked taller than Annie remembered, not because he had changed, but because the old coat had hidden the way he carried himself. Annie stared at him. He dismissed the two legal advisors behind him with a quiet word. They walked away. "Annie," he said. She gave a short laugh without humor. "So it is you." "Yes." "Richard what?" "Richard Whitmore." "I know that now." Margaret looked between them. "I'll give you privacy." "No," Annie said. "Please stay." Margaret remained. Richard gestured toward the empty conference room. "We should sit." "I'm fine standing." He accepted that. Annie asked, "Was any of it real?" "The accusation was real." "That isn't what I mean." "I know. Did you walk into that store to test us?" "I went there to investigate complaints, dressed like someone who had nowhere to sleep." "Yes." "With a recorder?" "Yes." "And security outside?" "Yes." Annie looked away for a moment. "So when Gary told you to kneel, you could have ended it. I could have revealed who I was. But you didn't." "No." "Why?" "I wanted to see how far he would go. I wanted to know whether anyone would stop him." Annie turned back to him. "You wanted an answer?" "Yes. I was the one who had to pay for it." Richard's expression changed. She continued before he could speak. "You had lawyers outside. You had security. You had a car waiting. I had $4.20, a bus to catch, and a father who needed medicine." "I know." "No, you know now." Richard did not defend himself. Annie's voice remained low, but every word landed harder because of it. "You walked into that store knowing you could leave whenever you wanted. People like me don't get to leave the consequences behind." "You're right." The answer stopped her. She had expected an explanation, perhaps a polished apology that turned him into the reasonable one. Instead, he said, "I believed I was testing the character of my employees. I did not consider that someone without power might be forced to carry the cost of that test." Annie looked at Margaret, then back at him. "Was the internship payment for what I did?" "No." "You opened my file because of that night." "Yes." "Then how is it not payment?" Richard walked to the table and placed a folder on it. "Your work was stripped of your name and evaluated by 3 people who did not know why it had been submitted. You ranked first." Annie did not touch the folder. He continued. "You corrected inventory losses, identified reporting errors, and trained employees without credit. The incident made me look. Your work gave me a reason to keep looking." "And the scholarship?" "You have not earned it yet." Her eyes narrowed. "It remains competitive," he said. "Your final project will be evaluated by the board. Will you vote?" "If you want me removed, I will remove myself." "I do." "Then I will." Margaret watched Richard carefully. Annie took a breath. "I want the project judged without my name attached until the presentation. I want an outside review of the data, and I don't want the company using my story for publicity." "Agreed. And if I fail, nobody changes the result because you feel guilty." "Agreed." She looked at the photograph on the wall. "I almost quit tonight. Are you still going to?" Annie thought about Denise, the sleeping workers on buses, the promotion files that had disappeared, and Vanessa's locked folders. "No." Richard nodded. "Then what do you need?" "The records your regional office restricted." You will receive access through the independent audit team, not as a favor. As part of the investigation you triggered. Annie picked up her notebook. As she reached the elevator, Richard called her name. She turned. I am sorry, he said. Not because you discovered who I am, because you were right about what my silence cost. Annie studied him for a moment. An apology is a beginning, Mr. Whitmore. It isn't the repair. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside, leaving Richard in the hallway with the truth he had gone looking for and had not expected to find in himself. The next morning, Annie found a new folder waiting in the secure audit portal. Her access had been restored through an independent account, separate from Vanessa's regional system. Margaret stood beside her desk while Annie opened it. You can review payroll, transportation, scheduling, training, injury reports, and promotion records, she said. Every download will be logged. That's fine. You sound disappointed. I'm not. I just don't want anyone saying I got special access because Mr. Whitmore felt guilty. They may say it anyway. Annie looked at her. That doesn't bother you? It bothers me. It simply does not surprise me. Margaret placed a small stack of forms beside the keyboard. These are your formal requests for interviews with finance, human resources, transportation, and branch operations. Put every question in writing before the meetings, so nobody can claim I asked for something else later. Exactly. Annie opened her spiral notebook. Margaret nodded toward it. You kept good notes during your conversation with Mr. Whitmore? I wrote everything down when I got home. How did your father react? He stared at me for a full minute, then asked whether billionaires normally dress like they sleep under bridges. Margaret smiled. What did you tell him? That this one apparently does when he's investigating his own company. And after that? He said rich people have strange hobbies. The humor faded from Annie's face as she turned back to the screen. He also said Mr. Whitmore was wrong to let things go that far. He was. You work for him. That does not change the answer. Annie studied her for a moment, then opened the first data file. Over the next week, the night shift promise became more than a list of complaints. Annie worked with departments she had only known as names on headquarters doors. In finance, a senior analyst named Paul Nguyen showed her the cost of replacing one overnight employee. Recruiting, background checks, training hours, overtime while the position stays open, Paul said, moving figures across a spreadsheet. The company estimates around $3,800. That doesn't include mistakes made while new workers are learning. No. Or experienced employees leaving because they're training replacements every month. No. Annie entered another formula. Paul leaned closer. What are you adding? Inventory errors linked to turnover. That will be difficult to prove. I can compare branches with similar sales but different retention. Paul considered it. That might work. At the end of the meeting, he printed a report for her. You know, he said. Most interns come in asking how to increase revenue. I'm trying to stop the company from losing money by helping workers. Those things aren't opposites. Paul gave her a slow nod. A lot of executives take years to learn that. In transportation, Annie met Linda Brooks, a 63-year-old director who had started as a route dispatcher. You want late-night shuttles for employees? Linda asked. Not everywhere. Only branches where public transportation ends before the shift does. That could get expensive. So does turnover. Linda folded her arms. You have numbers? Annie slid a page across the table. Linda read it, then reached for her glasses. These estimates are conservative. I didn't want anyone saying I inflated them. You're proposing rideshare vouchers too, for branches with fewer than 10 overnight employees. A shuttle wouldn't make sense there. Linda looked at Annie over the top of the page. Who taught you operations? Nobody officially. That wasn't my question. Annie thought about nights counting damaged boxes, missed buses, and Gary signing his initials over her corrections. People who made mistakes and blamed me for noticing. Linda laughed once. Fair answer. Human Resources was less welcoming. A vice president named Martin Cole, no relation to Margaret, listened to Annie's proposal with his hands folded over his stomach. Anonymous complaints encourage false accusations, he said. They also protect people who are afraid of retaliation. We already have a reporting hotline, managed through regional offices. That is standard. Several complaints disappeared inside those offices. Martin's expression tightened. That is under investigation. That's why I'm proposing an outside vendor. You are suggesting that company managers cannot be trusted. I'm suggesting that workers need another option when the complaint involves the same managers reviewing it. Martin turned toward Margaret, who had accompanied Annie as an observer. Is this the official position of Mr. Whitmore's office? Margaret replied, this is Miss Carter's project. Martin looked back at Annie. You are very confident for someone with limited corporate experience. I'm confident about the problem. Those are not the same thing. No, sir, they aren't. He waited, perhaps expecting her to retreat. She did not. By Friday, Annie had built the proposal into 10 connected policies. Schedules posted 2 weeks in advance. Standardized overnight pay. Transportation support. Emergency medical grants. Independent complaints. Audited promotions. Paid online training. Credit for employee process improvements. Night shift representation in regional meetings. And formal protection against retaliation. She titled the financial section "The Cost of Treating Experience as Disposable." Nathan found the draft open on a shared table. That title sounds emotional, he said. It's accurate. You're still trying to prove the company is unfair. I'm trying to prove unfairness is expensive. He pulled out a chair. Let me give you some advice. Annie continued entering figures. You're going to anyway. You have Richard Whitmore's attention. That's more valuable than this project. Her fingers stopped over the keyboard. What does that mean? It means you could choose something safer, finish the internship, get your scholarship, and stop making enemies. I didn't come here to collect important friends. You think that's noble now? Wait until you're older. Annie looked at him. Do people become more honest with age? No. Then I'll keep my current plan. Nathan shook his head. You really don't know how this place works. I know how the stores work. That seems to be what headquarters keeps forgetting. Across the room, Sophie sat silently with her laptop. Later that afternoon, during a group review, she raised her hand. What about transportation vouchers for smaller branches? She asked Harold. That would be cheaper than shuttles. Annie looked up. Harold nodded. That's practical. Sophie continued. The program could be limited to employees whose shifts begin or end after public transit hours. Annie waited until she finished. That matches the recommendation I submitted Tuesday, Annie said. I can share the cost model if the group wants to review it. The room went quiet. Sophie's cheeks colored. I didn't realize you had already included it. I emailed the draft to everyone. I haven't read the full document yet. That explains it. Annie's tone remained polite. Harold asked her to present the figures, and for the next 10 minutes she walked the group through the model without mentioning Sophie again. Afterward, Margaret found her near the elevators. You handled that well. I wanted to say more. I know. Would it have been wrong? Not necessarily, but you corrected the record without turning the meeting into a personal argument. Annie pressed the elevator button. Is that what leadership is? Finding a polite way to tell people not to steal your work? Sometimes. The doors opened, but before Annie stepped inside, Margaret handed her a revised project schedule. Your preliminary review is in 3 weeks. That soon? The board wants results, or Vanessa wants me to fail before I find more. Margaret did not answer. Annie looked down at the schedule. I need more interviews. You have approval for 6 additional branches. From Vanessa? From the independent audit team. That evening, Annie returned home after Thomas had finished dinner. He had left a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans covered in foil. You're late, he said from the living room. I was working. You were always working before. You still came home by 8. This is different. How? Annie set her bag down. At the store, I knew when the shift ended. Thomas looked at the dark circles beneath her eyes. Sit down. I need to finish a report. Sit. She obeyed. He handed her the plate. You cannot build a program for tired workers while becoming one. I'm fine. That word has been lying to families for generations. Annie took a bite. Thomas watched until she swallowed. What are you calling the project? The Night Shift Promise. That's a big name. It's a big problem. Then, make sure it promises something the company can actually keep. Annie looked at the worn maintenance keyring hanging beside his chair. I'm trying. Thomas nodded. That is all honest work ever starts with. The following Monday, Annie opened the shared data system and saw that several complaint totals had changed overnight. One branch that reported 18 cases on Friday now showed 6. Another had no complaints at all. She checked the modification history. The edits came from an administrative account inside regional operations. Annie reached for her notebook. Someone was no longer trying to slow down the night shift promise. Someone had started rewriting the evidence before she could finish it. Annie compared the altered complaint totals with the screenshots she had saved on Friday. 18 complaints had become 6. 11 had become 3. At a branch in Marietta, every overnight complaint from the previous year had disappeared. She checked the modification history again. Regional Operations Administrator. No employee name appeared. Annie picked up the phone and called Margaret. The numbers changed. What numbers? The complaint totals. Someone edited them over the weekend. Do you have the earlier versions? Screenshots, downloaded reports, and the email attachments from the audit account. Do not open any more files. Annie frowned. Why? If the system is being altered, we need to preserve your access history. Close the portal and wait for me. I can keep comparing the records. You can also give whoever changed them a reason to accuse you of doing the same thing. Annie removed her hands from the keyboard. I'll wait. Margaret arrived 10 minutes later with Harold and a member of the independent audit team named Elena Ruiz. Elena was in her 40s, wore no jewelry except a wedding band, and spoke with the calm precision of someone accustomed to rooms where every word might later become evidence. Show me what you saw, Elena said. Annie opened only the documents stored outside the altered portal. She placed Friday's report beside Monday's version. Elena compared the timestamps. You downloaded this before the changes? Yes. Did anyone ask you to? No. Margaret told me to save versions of important documents. Margaret gave Annie a brief note. Elena examined the metadata. These are authentic copies. We'll take custody of them. Can you tell who changed the system? Not yet. The account belongs to Regional Operations. That tells us where the access came from, not who used it. Annie looked toward Margaret. Vanessa's department. Elena closed the folder. Do not make that accusation outside this room. I didn't say Vanessa changed it, but others may hear what you are suggesting. Annie crossed her arms. Someone changed records after my project started reviewing them. That is a fact, Elena said. Stay with facts. The phrase reminded Annie of her father's advice after the supermarket incident. People who lie first usually write the report first. What happens now? We secure the system logs and compare them with other records. What other records? Elena looked at Annie's charts. You tell me. You found the contradiction. Annie turned toward the whiteboard and began writing. Payroll. If someone resigned, their final hours should appear there. Uniform orders for replacements. New employee badges. Training attendance. Building access. Workers' compensation. Health benefit enrollment. Harold added. Recruitment expenses. And delivery errors, Annie said. Branches with constant turnover usually have more receiving mistakes. Elena watched her fill the board. You think like an auditor. I think like someone who has been blamed for missing boxes. For the rest of the morning, Annie worked from records Vanessa's office did not control. The deeper she looked, the less believable the official reports became. A branch listed 4 overnight resignations, yet 27 employees had been removed from payroll. Another claimed no promotion candidates had been rejected, but the training department showed 14 workers completed management courses without receiving interviews. At a store outside Decatur, 3 black employees were marked as having voluntarily withdrawn their applications for shift supervisor. Annie found emails from all 3, asking when interviews would be scheduled. One message had gone unanswered for 6 weeks. Annie printed it and placed it beside the promotion summary. They didn't withdraw, she said. They were ignored. Elena read the email. Add it to the evidence list. By noon, the audit team had identified 11 branches with inconsistent records. Harold rubbed his forehead. This is larger than one bad manager. It was always larger, Annie said. He looked at her. You suspected that from the start? I knew Gary wasn't brave enough to act that way unless he believed somebody above him would protect him. Across the building, Vanessa sat in a closed meeting with 2 regional directors. Stop sending revised files, she said. One director shifted in his chair. You told us to correct reporting errors. I told you to standardize categories. I did not tell you to leave obvious changes in the system history. We used the administrative account, and now the auditors are tracing it. The second director lowered his voice. Should we delete the access logs? Vanessa stared at him. Do you want to turn an internal review into a criminal investigation? No. Then do nothing until I tell you. What about Annie Carter? Vanessa's expression cooled. She is an intern. an 18-year-old girl with no degree. She's the one finding the discrepancies, because Richard Whitmore placed her in rooms she does not understand. Do you think he knows? He knows enough to be dangerous. Vanessa stood and walked toward the window. Annie's credibility is the problem. Remove that, and every number she touches becomes questionable. Back on the 22nd floor, Annie requested interviews with employees whose files appeared altered. Most refused. One woman agreed to speak by phone but would not give permission to use her name. "I'm 4 years from retirement," she told Annie. "If they fire me, I lose the health plan. The company has rules against retaliation." The woman gave a tired laugh. "Rules don't sit beside you when the medicine bill comes." Annie did not argue. "Did someone ask you to change your statement?" "Yes." "Who?" "I'm not saying." "Did they ask you to sign anything false?" A long silence followed. "They said my complaint had been misunderstood. They wanted me to sign a new summary." "Did you?" "No." "Why not?" "My husband spent 30 years telling our children that a person's name should never sit under a lie." Annie wrote the sentence down. "Would you testify to the auditors?" "I can't stand in front of executives." "You don't have to. You can submit a confidential statement." "Will they protect me?" "I can't promise what I don't control." The woman appreciated the honesty. "Send me the form." After the call, Annie sat quietly. Margaret entered carrying 2 cups of coffee and placed one beside her. "Bad interview?" "Honest interview." "What did she say?" "That she can't afford to be brave." Margaret sat across from her. "Most people can't afford the version of courage praised in speeches." "Then how does anything change?" "Sometimes through one public voice, sometimes through 100 private refusals." She wouldn't sign a false statement. "That matters. It doesn't feel like enough. Silent justice often feels small while it is happening." Annie looked at the growing evidence file. "What if Vanessa destroys the rest before we find it? Then we follow what cannot be destroyed. People, money, time, systems that were never designed to tell the same lie together." That evening, Richard called a meeting with legal counsel and Evelyn. "We have enough to suspend Vanessa," he said. "Enough to suspect her," the general counsel replied. "Not enough to prove she personally ordered the changes." She restricted Annie's access. Within her authority, she protected Gary. Through decisions she can claim were delegated. Richard pushed back from the table. "So we wait while she attacks another employee?" Evelyn spoke from the end of the room. "You waited in the supermarket." Richard looked at her. "That was different." "No, you believed patience would reveal the truth then. Now patience is uncomfortable because it restrains you. She may hurt Annie. She already has." Evelyn folded her hands. "Power makes people believe justice should move quickly once they are personally offended. Workers have been waiting for years." Richard's expression tightened. "What do you suggest?" "Protect the records. Protect the witnesses. Let Vanessa believe she still controls the story. And Annie? Do not turn that child into bait." "I would never." "You already let her pay for one of your tests." The room fell silent. Richard looked toward the evidence on the table. "Then we make sure she knows every risk." At the same moment, Vanessa opened Annie's personnel file and read the sections concerning Thomas Carter's illness, Annie's postponed college plans, and the special circumstances of her internship. Facts had failed to stop the night shift promise. Vanessa decided it was time to make the company question the girl presenting them. The first rumor reached Annie before lunch. She was standing beside the printer, waiting for a financial report, when 2 employees entered the copy room and stopped talking. One of them looked at her, then quickly lowered her eyes. Annie collected the pages and left without asking what had been said. By the time she returned to her desk, an anonymous message had appeared on the intern discussion board. "Some people earn their place. Others save the right billionaire at the right time." The post vanished 10 minutes later, but not before several employees had shared screenshots. Nathan leaned against Annie's desk. "You should ignore it. That's easy advice when your name isn't in it." "It doesn't use your name. It doesn't need to." Sophie glanced around the floor before lowering her voice. "People are saying Richard created the internship position for you." "He didn't." "I'm telling you what they're saying." "What else?" Sophie hesitated. "Somebody said your father's illness was included in the scholarship request to make the board feel sorry for you." Annie stared at her. "My father's medical history is private." "I know. Then how would anyone here know?" Sophie looked toward the executive offices. "I don't know." Annie did. Her personnel file contained the emergency leave request she had submitted after Thomas's stroke. It also contained notes explaining why she needed overnight hours. and why she had postponed college. Someone had opened that file and turned her family's hardest year into office gossip. Blake approached with his phone in one hand. There's more online. He showed Annie a post from an account with no photograph. EverTrust's newest management star is an 18-year-old stock clerk personally selected by the CEO after a staged discrimination incident. Qualifications no longer matter when a company needs a diversity story. The post included a blurred photograph of Annie entering headquarters. Her face was still recognizable. Where did they get that? She asked. Probably outside the building. Nathan took the phone. This is getting ugly. It was ugly when people were saying it in private, Annie replied. Now it's only visible. Harold called her into his office that afternoon. Margaret was already there. Harold closed the door. Corporate Communications wants to issue a statement. Saying what? That your selection followed an independent review. Annie looked at Margaret. Will they mention the supermarket? Not without your permission, Margaret said. What does Mr. Whitmore want? He wants to defend you publicly. Annie gave a short laugh. That would prove their point. Harold folded his hands. It would also stop some of the speculation. No, it would replace one story with another. Instead of saying I got here because he felt sorry for me, they'll say I stayed because he protected me. Margaret nodded. That was my concern. Harold looked between them. So we say nothing? I didn't say that, Annie replied. Publish the selection process. Show the anonymous scores. Show the requirements. Don't make the statement about me. That may not stop the attacks. It will give people facts. Margaret leaned forward. And what will you do? Finish the project. Harold studied her face. Are you sure? No, but I'm still doing it. When Annie left the office, she found a folded note on her keyboard. Ask Richard how much your courage was worth. She read it once, then placed it inside her notebook. Nathan watched her. You should report that. I will. You don't look upset. I am. You hide it well. That's not the same as handling it well. At home that evening, Thomas was seated at the kitchen table with the anonymous post open on his phone. Annie stopped in the doorway. Who sent you that? Mrs. Bennett. She shouldn't have. She thought I should know. Thomas enlarged the photograph with his right thumb. They followed you outside the building? It could be an old picture. Is what they're saying true? Annie placed her bag down. Which part? That Whitmore picked you. He opened my file after the store incident. Thomas waited. My work was evaluated without my name, she continued. I ranked first. Then why do you sound like you're defending yourself to me? Because everybody else thinks I'm lying. I'm not everybody else. Annie sat across from him. They know about your stroke. His expression changed. How? My employee file. Thomas put the phone face down. So now I'm part of the story. I'm sorry. For what? Getting me sick? For bringing this into the house. You didn't bring it here. Somebody carried it here because they thought hurting you at work wasn't enough. Annie rubbed her eyes. I could leave the program. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Do you want to? I want the noise to stop. That wasn't my question. She looked toward the jar on the counter that still held her college savings. No. Then don't confuse peace with surrender. It wouldn't be surrender if I chose it. That depends on why you choose. Annie leaned back. What if every success I have from now on gets connected to Richard? Then make your work too clear to dismiss. They can still lie. People lied about me too. When? Thomas gave a tired smile. When I worked at the school, a contractor accused me of stealing tools, said I was the only one with keys. What happened? The principal checked the maintenance log. The contractor had signed the tools out himself. You never told me. There wasn't much to tell. You were accused of theft, and the records cleared me. Thomas tapped the table. A good name matters, but a good record protects it when people decide your name is not enough. The next morning, Richard met with Evelyn in his office. I'm issuing a statement, he said. No, they are attacking her family, and if you speak for her, they will say she has no voice without yours. I cannot sit here while someone destroys her reputation. You can act without turning yourself into her shield. Richard paced toward the window. What do you suggest? Remove yourself from the scholarship decision, publish the scoring system, order an external review of her project, prohibit the communications department from using her story. I already agreed not to use it. Then put it in writing. Richard turned. And the rumors? Truth does not always silence rumors quickly. That is not good enough. No, Evelyn said. It is merely true. She rose from her chair. You wanted to learn how workers lived without your protection. Now learn how to protect fairness without making yourself the center of it. By noon, Evertrust published the internship criteria, anonymous project scores, and evaluation procedures. Richard formally withdrew from Annie's scholarship committee. An independent university panel agreed to review the night shift promise. The facts did not end the whispers, but they changed the ground beneath them. That afternoon, Margaret handed Annie a sealed envelope. What is this? Written confirmation that your image, personal history, and supermarket incident cannot be used for company publicity without your consent. Annie read the document. Mr. Whitmore signed it. Yes. Did he want to? He wanted to do more. Why didn't he? Because sometimes leadership means accepting that your help can make another person smaller. Annie folded the paper and placed it in her notebook beside the anonymous note. That night, she worked on the board presentation at the kitchen table. Thomas placed his old maintenance key ring beside her laptop. Most of the keys no longer opened anything. Why are you giving me these? She asked. The school changed the locks after I retired. That doesn't answer me. Thomas touched the worn brass ring. They remind me that people trusted me with rooms they never noticed I protected. Annie picked it up. What am I supposed to do with them? Keep them until the presentation. They're heavy. So is being trusted. The following morning, Annie arrived at headquarters before 7. She touched her access card to the reader. The light flashed red. She tried again. Access denied. A security officer approached. Miss Carter, your credentials have been suspended. Why? He looked uncomfortable. There's an internal investigation. Into what? Unauthorized access to confidential records. Annie stood still. Through the glass doors, she saw Vanessa Reed crossing the lobby in a cream-colored suit. Vanessa did not look toward her. She did not need to. Changing the numbers had failed. Spreading rumors had failed. Now someone had decided to turn Annie from the investigator into the accused. The security officer shifted his weight and lowered his voice. I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I'm not allowed to let you upstairs. Who suspended my credentials? I only received the notice. Can I see it? He turned the monitor slightly. The screen showed her name beside 3 words. Data access violation. Annie read the line twice. I used the permissions the audit team gave me. I don't know anything about that. My presentation is tomorrow. I understand. No, you don't. Everything I need is upstairs. Before the officer could answer, Margaret crossed the lobby at a pace Annie had never seen from her. What happened? They disabled my badge. Margaret looked at the monitor. Who authorized this? The officer straightened. Regional Compliance sent the order at 6:40. Regional Compliance does not control access to an independently supervised intern. I'm only following what came through the system. Margaret turned to Annie. Did you receive an email? No. Any warning? Nothing. Vanessa reached the elevators and pressed the call button. Margaret called across the lobby. Miss Reed. Vanessa turned with a composed expression. Margaret, good morning. Did your office suspend Annie's access? Vanessa glanced toward Annie as though noticing her for the first time. I was informed of a serious confidentiality concern. What concern? Restricted employee files were downloaded outside normal project limits. The audit team authorized those files. That is under review. Annie stepped forward. I didn't download anything outside the audit portal. Vanessa gave her a patient smile. This is not the place to debate an internal investigation. You made it public when you locked me out in the lobby. Your access was suspended to protect the company. From what? From further unauthorized activity. Margaret's voice hardened. You are describing an allegation as though it has already been proven. I am describing a precaution. The elevator doors opened. Vanessa stepped inside. If Miss Carter has done nothing wrong, the review will confirm that. The doors closed before Annie could answer. Margaret took out her phone. Do not call Richard, Annie said. I'm calling Elena Rise. Annie exhaled. Good. Elena arrived 20 minutes later with Harold and Evertrust's general counsel. They used a small conference room beside the lobby because Annie was still barred from the main floors. Elena placed a printed access report on the table. The allegation states that you entered regional personnel files at 11:48 Friday night and downloaded confidential promotion records. I was home Friday night. Can anyone confirm that? My father, Harold asked. Were you logged into the company system from home? No. I worked on printed notes after dinner. Elena pointed to the report. The access came through your employee credentials. Then someone used them. Did you give your password to anyone? No. Write it down anywhere? Never. Leave your tablet unattended? Annie thought back through the previous week. I left it in the project room during lunch on Thursday, but it locks automatically. Who had access to the room? Every intern, several managers. Elena turned to the general counsel. We need device logs, not only user logs. He nodded and began sending instructions. Margaret asked, what exactly was downloaded? Elena opened another page. Promotion appeals, discrimination complaints, and medical leave records from 12 branches. The same branches in Annie's project, Harold said. Annie looked at the timestamps. These files were downloaded in less than 4 minutes. Elena nodded. What does that tell you? I couldn't have found and opened all of them that quickly. Why not? The folders are organized by employee number, not branch. Someone would need a prepared list or an automated script. The general counsel stopped typing. She's right. Annie traced the times with one finger. And look at the order. The employee numbers are sequential. Elena leaned closer. This wasn't someone researching. It was a bulk export. Can my intern account even do that? Harold answered first. No. Elena looked toward the general counsel. Unless administrative permissions were temporarily attached to it. The room fell silent. Margaret asked, who can change those permissions? Regional system administrators, corporate information security, and 2 compliance officers. Vanessa's department has regional administrative access, Annie said. Elena held up a hand. We follow the record. We do not jump ahead of it. Annie sat back. I know. The general counsel received a message and read it. The device identification does not match Annie's tablet. Whose device is it? Margaret asked. We don't know yet. It connected through a regional office network. Harold looked relieved. Then her access should be restored. Not until the investigation formally clears her, the counsel replied. The presentation is tomorrow. She may still present. With what? Annie asked. My slides are in the system. Margaret looked at her. Do you have backups? Some printed charts. My cost model is on the audit drive. Elena said, the audit drive is preserved. We can provide verified copies, but you cannot edit them while the review is open. Annie closed her eyes for a moment. Her presentation had been planned around live charts, branch comparisons, and projected savings. Now she would have 1 day to rebuild it without access to the files. Harold leaned toward her. We can request a delay. No. Annie, this is not your fault. That won't be the story if I don't show up. Margaret said, a delay would be reasonable. Vanessa will call it proof that I wasn't ready. You do not have to answer every accusation by exhausting yourself. Annie looked down at the old key ring Thomas had given her. It rested beside her spiral notebook. I'm presenting tomorrow. Elena gathered the access reports. Then we will confirm in writing that your evidence was submitted before the disputed login and independently verified. Will that be enough? It will establish that your project was not built from improperly obtained information. And the accusation? We continue investigating. Annie nodded. Then tell me what I'm allowed to use. For the next 6 hours, she worked in the lobby conference room. Harold brought printed audit summaries. Margaret retrieved her approved project binder under supervision. Paul from finance delivered the cost calculations he had signed. Linda from transportation sent written confirmation that Annie's voucher proposal was workable. Even people who had once kept their distance began to help. Blake came downstairs carrying a stack of charts. I printed these before your account was locked. Annie looked at him. Why? I thought Vanessa might restrict the shared folder again. That was smart. He placed them on the table. You don't have to sound surprised. Sophie arrived later with a portable projector. I borrowed this from training. Am I allowed to use it? It doesn't connect to the company network. Annie accepted it. Thank you. Sophie hesitated. I should have credited you for the transportation idea. Yes, you should have. I'm sorry. Annie studied her, then nodded. Help me check the slides. Nathan did not appear. At 7 that evening, Thomas arrived in Mrs. Bennett's car. He entered the lobby with his cane tucked beneath one arm and a paper bag in his right hand. You missed dinner, he said. Annie stood. Dad, you didn't have to come. Yes, I did. You stop answering your phone when you think worry is a form of productivity. He opened the bag. Inside were 2 meatloaf sandwiches and a thermos of coffee. Margaret introduced herself again, and Thomas thanked her for looking after Annie. I'm not looking after her, Margaret said. I'm trying to keep up. Thomas smiled, then turned to his daughter. Tell me what happened. Someone used my credentials to download files. Can they prove it was you? No. Can you prove it wasn't? They're working on it. Then eat. Annie sat beside him. I may lose the scholarship. You may. I may lose the internship. You may. She stared at him. That's not comforting. I'm not here to comfort you with lies. He placed the old maintenance keys in her palm. You stood beside a stranger when you had no power. Tomorrow, I'll sit beside my daughter while she tells the truth. The next morning, Annie entered Evertrust through the public doors because her badge still did not work. The same security officer who had once mistaken her for a delivery worker stepped aside. Good luck, Miss Carter. Thank you. Upstairs, the boardroom doors stood open. Vanessa was already inside, speaking quietly with two directors. Richard sat at the far end of the table and did not approach Annie. Evelyn waited in the visitor section beside Thomas. Vanessa began first. She described Annie as intelligent but inexperienced, committed but reckless, promising but unable to understand the limits of corporate responsibility. Annie listened without interruption. When Vanessa finished, the board chair looked toward the doorway. Miss Carter, we're ready for your presentation. At 18 years old, carrying paper charts, a worn spiral notebook, and her father's useless keys, Annie walked toward a table built for people who had never expected her to reach it. At 2 in the morning, the people keeping this company alive are almost invisible. Annie's voice was steady, though her hand tightened around Thomas's old keyring beneath the table. She placed the first printed chart on the easel. They receive deliveries, count inventory, clean spills, restock medicine, and prepare stores for the morning rush. Yet they have the highest turnover rate in the company, the fewest promotion opportunities, and the least access to management training. One board member leaned forward. What is the financial effect? Annie changed the chart. Evertrust spends an average of $3,800 replacing one overnight employee. That includes recruiting, background checks, overtime, and basic training. It does not include inventory errors, damaged products, lost customer trust, or the experienced workers who leave because they are tired of training replacements. She pointed to a column of figures. Across the branches reviewed, overnight turnover cost the company more than $4 million last year. A low murmur moved through the room. Vanessa folded her hands. That estimate assumes every departure was preventable. No, Annie said. It assumes 30% were preventable. I used the lowest figure supported by the data. The chief financial officer turned several pages. These calculations were reviewed? Paul Nguyen spoke from the side table. My department verified them. Annie continued. The night shift promise has 10 parts. Predictable schedules, consistent overnight pay, transportation support, emergency medical grants, independent reporting, promotion audits, paid online training, credit for employee improvements, night shift representation, and protection from retaliation. Nathan, seated behind the interns, looked down at his notes. A director near Vanessa interrupted. Transportation alone could become expensive. It could, Annie replied. That is why the plan uses shuttles only at large branches. Smaller locations would use limited rideshare vouchers after public transit stops running. Who designed that model? I did, with cost data from transportation. Linda Brooks lifted her hand. My department confirmed it is workable. Vanessa's expression did not change. Annie moved to the next page. The full pilot would cost less than half of what the 20 branches currently lose through turnover, overtime, injuries, and repeated training. If the program performs at the conservative level in this report, it will recover its cost within 3 years. The board chair removed his glasses. You are 18 years old, Miss Carter. Yes, sir. You expect us to believe you developed this without senior executives doing the work for you? Annie looked toward Richard but did not wait for him to answer. No, sir. I expect you to examine the records showing who created each version. She placed the document log on the table. My calculations were reviewed by finance. My transportation plan was reviewed by transportation. The audit team confirmed my data. Advice improved the project, but the work is mine. Vanessa leaned forward. That confidence is impressive, but confidence is not experience. No, Mom. You have never managed a branch. No. You have never supervised a regional budget. No. You have not even begun college. That is also true. Then perhaps you do not understand the danger of turning every unhappy employee into a corporate crisis. Annie looked at her. I understand what happens when people are afraid to report a real crisis. Vanessa's mouth tightened. This proposal is based on your personal resentment toward one manager. No, Gary Hollis made me notice the problem. The records showed me how large it was. The records you accessed without authorization? The room became still. Elena Ruiz stood. The audit team has completed its preliminary review of that allegation. Vanessa turned toward her. This hearing is about Miss Carter's project. It is also being used to question her credibility, Elena replied. The disputed downloads came from a regional administrative device. They did not come from Miss Carter's tablet, home network, or user permissions. Annie released a breath. Elena distributed copies of the report. Her credentials were attached to a bulk export she did not have authority to perform. The files were downloaded in 4 minutes from an office within regional operations. Vanessa's face remained composed. Then someone misused her account. Yes. That does not establish who. No, Elena said. But it establishes that Annie Carter did not perform the download. The board chair nodded toward Annie. Continue. Annie turned to the final section. While reviewing turnover, I found that the official reports did not match payroll, uniform orders, access badges, injury records, or training attendance. She placed 2 charts side by side. This branch reported 4 overnight resignations. Payroll showed 27. This branch reported no rejected promotion candidates. 14 workers completed management training and were never interviewed. A director frowned. Why would regional reports show different numbers? Because complaints and departures were reclassified. By whom? I can show which accounts made the changes. The audit must determine who gave the orders. Vanessa spoke before anyone else could. An intern is now accusing an entire department of fraud. I am not accusing an entire department, Annie said. I am showing where the numbers changed. Vanessa gave a thin smile. You have a talent for making ordinary administrative corrections sound sinister. Annie looked directly at her. The numbers were changed. The people who suffered from those changes were not. No one spoke. Elena opened another file. The audit confirms systematic alterations across 11 branches. Discrimination complaints were relabeled as scheduling concerns. Involuntary terminations were recorded as voluntary resignations. Promotion applications from Black overnight workers were marked withdrawn despite emails showing the applicants continued requesting interviews. The chair turned to Vanessa. Did your office authorize these changes? Regional managers correct coding errors every week. Did you authorize these? I would need to review each case. Richard rose from his seat. Vanessa looked toward him. Richard, surely we should not allow one intern's interpretation to damage. This is not only her interpretation. His voice ended the sentence. He walked toward the center of the room. Several weeks ago, I entered one of our stores wearing an old coat and work boots. I did not identify myself. The board members looked at one another. Annie remained still. Richard continued. Gary Hollis accused me of stealing bread and milk. He had no evidence. He ordered me onto my knees and threatened force. Vanessa's face lost some of its color. Annie Carter was working that night. She did not know who I was. She believed I was poor, possibly homeless, and unable to help her. Richard placed a small recorder on the table. She stepped between me and the manager. She proved I had not stolen anything. Then she paid for the food with her own wages. He pressed a button. Gary's voice filled the boardroom. Get on your knees and empty your pockets, old man. Then came Melissa's lie, Kyle's laughter, and Annie's refusal to remain silent. When the recording ended, no one moved. Richard looked around the table. That night did not prove Annie was qualified to lead. Her work proved that. He turned toward her. That night proved she possessed the one quality no university can guarantee: character. Vanessa stood. This entire process is compromised. You personally selected her. I opened her file, Richard said. Her work was evaluated anonymously. I removed myself from the scholarship committee at her request. He faced the board. I also owe this room an admission. I could have revealed myself inside that store. I chose not to because I wanted to see how far the abuse would go. His voice lowered. Annie paid for my decision. Her wages, her father's therapy, and her future were placed at risk while my lawyers waited outside. Evelyn watched him from beside Thomas. Richard continued. Power does not become moral simply because it calls itself an investigation. I was wrong. The admission unsettled the room more than a denial would have. The general counsel placed a final set of documents before the board. These emails were recovered this morning. They include instructions from Vanessa Reed's office to recategorize complaints, delay promotion interviews, restrict Annie Carter's access, and prepare disciplinary action before the credential review was complete. Vanessa stared at the papers. This is being taken out of context. Evelyn rose slowly. A person who protects a company by hurting its people is not protecting the company, she said. She is protecting herself. The board chair called for an immediate vote. Vanessa was suspended pending independent investigation. All regional records were preserved. Previous complaints would be reopened, and affected workers would be contacted. No applause followed. Annie looked toward the names on the evidence list. Denise Walker, Marcus Lee. Employees she had never met. Workers who had stayed silent because medicine, rent, and retirement depended on it. The victory did not feel like defeating Vanessa. It felt like those people had finally entered the room. The board chair asked Annie and Thomas to wait outside while the scholarship decision and pilot program were discussed. In the hallway, Annie's hands began to shake. Thomas reached for her with his recovering left hand. His fingers closed around hers. For the first time since his stroke, his grip felt stronger than her fear. The boardroom doors remained closed for 23 minutes. Annie sat beside Thomas on a bench in the hallway, holding the old key ring in both hands. The metal had warmed against her palm. "You keep checking the clock," Thomas said. "I'm not. You've looked at it 6 times. What if they approve the project but reject the scholarship? Then the project still helps people. What if they reject both? Then you still told the truth in a room that needed to hear it." Annie looked at him. "You always have an answer." "No, I've just had more years to practice sounding calm." His left hand still rested over hers. The grip was weaker now, but he had not let go. At the far end of the hallway, Richard spoke quietly with Margaret. He did not approach. Annie noticed that, and understood. He was giving her space. The doors opened. The board chair stepped out. "Miss Carter, Mr. Carter, we're ready for you." Annie stood. Her knees felt unsteady, but Thomas rose beside her with his cane. Inside, Vanessa's seat was empty. The board chair waited until Annie sat down. "First, the board has approved a 20-branch pilot of the night shift promise." Annie blinked. "The pilot will begin next quarter," he continued. "Its results will be independently reviewed after 12 months. "Which parts were approved?" she asked. "All 10 recommendations, though transportation services may differ by location." Annie glanced toward Linda Brooks, who gave her a small nod. The chair lifted another document. "Second, the scholarship committee has awarded you full tuition, books, housing assistance, and required academic expenses for 4 years at an accredited Georgia university." Thomas lowered his head. Annie turned toward him. His eyes were closed, and his mouth trembled. "Dad, I'm fine," he said, wiping his face. "For once, I mean it." A few board members smiled. Annie looked back at the chair. "Is the scholarship controlled by Mr. Whitmore?" "No. An independent education foundation will administer it." Mr. Whitmore withdrew from the decision. "And if I stop working for EverTrust? The scholarship remains yours as long as you meet the academic requirements." Only then did Annie breathe fully. The chair continued. "You will also remain a paid advisor to the Night Shift Promise while attending college. We are creating a Youth Worker Advisory Council, and we would like you to serve on it. I'd like to read the terms first." Richard's mouth lifted slightly. The chair nodded. "That is a reasonable answer." After the meeting, employees approached Annie one by one. Paul congratulated her. Linda asked when she could begin planning the transportation pilot. Harold shook her hand and told her the presentation had been better without the slides. Blake stopped near the door. "You did well. Thank you. I was wrong about you." Annie studied him. "About what?" He looked uncomfortable. "A lot. That's a start." Sophie hugged her before Annie could decide whether she wanted one. "I'm sorry for taking your idea. You already said that. I wanted to say it where other people could hear." Annie nodded. "That matters more." Nathan remained near the back of the room. He offered no apology, but he met Annie's eyes and gave a brief nod before leaving. Richard waited until they were alone except for Margaret, Evelyn, and Thomas. "I owe you another apology," he said. "You already gave one." "I know. This one is not for the store." Annie waited. "I believed I could correct the company by finding the wrong people and removing them. You showed me that the structure protecting them also had to change. That sounds less like an apology. It is also a promise. Evelyn stepped closer. Promises from billionaires should always come with paperwork. Thomas laughed. Richard handed Annie a copy of the pilot resolution. Then here is the paperwork. She accepted it. I still don't trust everything about you. You shouldn't. The answer surprised her. Richard continued. Trust should not be the price of accepting a fair opportunity. Evelyn touched Annie's shoulder. And a fair opportunity is not charity, child. Do not insult your own work by calling it that. That evening, Annie and Thomas returned home carrying the scholarship letter in Margaret's leather folder. Mrs. Bennet had left a chicken casserole in the oven and a note on the counter. I knew that suit would bring good luck. Return it after church. Thomas read the scholarship letter 3 times at the kitchen table. You're going to college, he said. Yes. You won't have to work nights. Not unless I want to. You won't want to. I might miss the quiet. You'll miss it for a week. He ran his finger across the line covering tuition. I thought my stroke had taken this from you. Annie sat beside him. It delayed me. It nearly buried you. No, it showed me what I could carry. Thomas shook his head. Children should not have to carry their parents. Maybe not, but families carry each other. He looked toward the jar labeled Annie's tuition. There were only $83 inside. What do we do with that? Annie smiled. Buy you a coffee cup you can hold with one hand. 4 years passed. Annie studied supply chain management, labor policy, finance, and organizational ethics at Georgia State University. She remained a paid advisor to EverTrust, attending pilot meetings between classes and spending summers visiting branches. The night shift promise did not solve everything. 2 locations resisted transportation changes. Several managers complained about outside complaint reviews. One branch tried to reduce hours to avoid paying the night differential. Annie learned that reform required maintenance. She also learned to read contracts, challenge budgets, and recognize the difference between a mistake and a pattern. The program's first annual report showed lower turnover, fewer injuries, and more overnight employees entering management training. By the 3rd year, 38 workers had received promotions. Denise Walker became a day shift supervisor at 59. Thomas continued physical therapy. His left hand never fully recovered, but he could hold his coffee again. He began volunteering at a community center, helping stroke survivors complete transportation forms and insurance appeals. Evelyn called Annie most Sundays. Are you eating? She would ask. Yes, ma'am. Something besides vending machine crackers? Usually. That means no. Richard never tried another secret inspection without clear protections in place. He still visited stores, but now he spoke with employees openly and allowed independent teams to conduct anonymous reviews. On graduation day, Thomas sat in the front row beside Evelyn. When Annie crossed the stage, he stood with his cane and clapped until she found him in the crowd. 2 months later, Annie became the youngest director of the EverTrust Worker Opportunity Foundation. The foundation funded scholarships, emergency medical grants, management training, and small food businesses in neighborhoods large retailers had ignored. One rainy night, Annie returned to the branch where everything had begun. The checkout lanes had been replaced, but Register 3 remained in the same place. A board near the break room displayed scholarship applications in English and Spanish. The overnight manager had started as a stock clerk. Near the frozen aisle, a young black employee cleaned the floor while reading from a college entrance test book balanced on a cart. When she saw Annie, she closed it quickly. Sorry, ma'am. I'll move. You're not in my way. The girl looked uncertain. What are you studying for? The SAT. Planning for college? Trying to. Have you ever thought about management? The girl laughed. I'm just overnight stock. Annie reached into her bag and handed her a foundation card. So was I. Outside, Richard waited beneath the awning in an ordinary coat. No disguise tonight? Annie asked. I've learned my lesson. That would make Miss Evelyn proud. She'll still find something to correct. They watched the young employee reading the card through the window. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had stayed quiet that night? Richard asked. Annie opened her spiral notebook. Its cover was more worn now. Inside were scholarship names, project notes, Thomas's therapy dates, and the anonymous message she had never thrown away. Richard removed a faded receipt from his wallet. $4.20. I think this belongs to you, he said. Years earlier, Annie had refused it. This time, she accepted the receipt and placed it inside the notebook beside a list of new applicants. I think about that night every time someone else gets a chance to speak. Richard looked through the glass at the workers keeping the store alive after midnight. Annie Carter had not saved a billionaire because she knew he was powerful. She had protected a stranger because she believed no human being deserved to be humiliated for appearing poor. Her choice had cost one night's wages. It had opened a future for thousands of workers whose names the boardroom had never learned. The story reminds us that true character is revealed when doing the right thing comes with a price. Annie did not defend Richard because she knew he was wealthy or powerful. She stood up because no person deserves to be humiliated for appearing poor. Her courage also shows that talent can exist in places leaders often overlook, especially among young workers, minorities, and those carrying family burdens in silence. Justice begins when people refuse to participate in cruelty, but lasting change requires more than punishing one wrongdoer. It requires fixing the system that allowed the injustice to continue. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.